Okay.
Shoshana?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We just want to welcome you to our session today of the End of Growth. I'm Shoshana Page. I'm a board member from New Jersey, along here with our fearless president, Bruce Hughes. I just wanted to let anyone know if you're interested in becoming a member of NEDA or would like to be on the board, please find me or Bruce. We're right here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dan Levison, who will be our moderator today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. This is Greg Garrett. He asked me if I would interview him in an attempted new model of presenting his ideas, which are so deep and complex, it doesn't always lend itself to single speaking. And my background is I went to good schools. I ran a small investment shop for a while. But in the last 5-10 years, I'm morphing the whole thing to a platform for local economy, venture philanthropy, and that type of thing. So my passion is engaging with leaders in the space, bringing support and best practices to them. So this is, and I like a good challenge. So this is a good challenge. So this is a nice little group. I'm glad we got the AC fixed. And
well, it's better
Greg,
than this room has been. This has been a very hot room this whole week.
Well, we're change agents. You know, we rip the things off the wall, we fix them. As Wendell Berry would say, just go out and do the next right thing. You don't need to overthink it. So, but Greg, I'm like, Greg, where are we going? What's this place at? He said, we're infiltrators. And but then I looked at the program, and you have Burt Cranka speaking, who's right on in this town, if you guys know Burt. And they're referencing Michael Schumann, right, deep, brilliant, thoughtful thinker. So I don't really feel so much like an infiltrator. I think we can maybe just have a conversation about some of the things happening that are inspiring Greg. I moved to Rhode Island purposely from Connecticut for this work. It's a petri dish of exceptional opportunity. It's funding and challenges all mixed up together. It's an ancient community where people still take the call. And even though we might not be expert at getting things done, things could get done here, like so easily, so possibly. So that's just the background for the day. And then I'm just going to ask Greg a few questions. You guys can jump in at any time, or we'll have, you know, time at the end for 50, 60 questions, as many as you guys have. Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself. That's good. Okay.
Yeah, then, right. That's enough. I was born and raised in the Bronx. I left the Bronx and lived in suburbia as a high schooler. I hated suburbia. The Bronx is a great place because you could ride public transit from 8 years old on and go downtown to the Museum of Natural History. So between the Museum of Natural History and the Bronx Zoo and the libraries, you know, I got through. I went to the University of Maine to study wildlife management. You know, growing up in the Bronx, I must have got the bug. I spent enough time outside as a kid that I got the bug to work with endangered species. And so I went to school at the University of Maine Wildlife. You have to go, it's part of the School of Forest Resources. And the School of Forest Resources had a brand new building at the University of Maine in Orono. And they had really fancy wood paneling in every single room. And underneath the name of the wood that it was, they had the thing that said, who paid for it. And Maine had 17 paper mills at the time, and all of them had rooms. So the school was a wholly owned subsidiary of the paper companies in Maine. So I got thrown out. You know, endangered species was not on the agenda. So I studied anthropology to figure out why they were so weird. Same thing I've been doing all my life. And essentially, after doing that and doing a little bit of graduate school, it was like the mid-70s, and it was like, there's going to be no money for research in anthropology anymore. And, you know, Western civilization wasn't cutting it, so I was living in Maine. I went into the woods. Well, I hitchhiked for a year, and then I went into the woods. And stayed there for another 10 years. And what's really funny is that I ran into somebody the other day that I've known for a long time. And he actually does the same business that I used to do, which was he fixes houses for the elderly so they can stay in their house. He does it as like a legitimate business. I did it. I hitchhiked with 40 pounds of tools on my back throughout this county in rural Maine, and was probably the most famous business in the county other than the ski areas. So that was, and then I helped found the Green Party. And the thing about the Green Party that nobody gets is that it is the only organization on the planet that really gets the connections between justice, the economy, the ecology, violence, and really has a way of trying to put it all together. And that is probably the seminal influence on my thinking, is having gone through all of that, you know. In school, I read all the, you know, the people we would talk about, Schumacher, I've read those guys. And then when I was living in the woods and working as a carpenter, I had winters off because it was too cold. Of course, the last thing I told them before I moved was, I said, you guys in the snowmobile industry, you're sowing the seeds of your own demise with climate change if you don't change your model of people driving big trucks hundreds of miles to ride snowmobiles that produce a lot of CO2. And then, you know, I mean, you can still do it now. I mean, gas prices are relatively low for people and people still do it. But climate change is going to get them, even in the mountains of Maine, and sooner than they think.
How long is it you've been in Providence?
I moved here 20 years ago, and the first thing I did was I wrote a book about my last campaign in Maine, and it was called The Campaign for the Forest. We were trying to ban clear cutting. And so, but my wife said, you know, it's time to go get closer to family. So we came down here, and as soon as I finished writing that book, I started working for the Sierra Club. And then I worked for People to End Homelessness. Then I ran for mayor as the Green Party candidate. And then I started working for the Environment Council. The Environment Council is the coalition of all the environmental groups in the state. And I run the office, and I've run the office now for 15 years. But that's part-time. I am the watershed steward because I founded Friends of the Mashasik, one of the rivers that runs into downtown. I am the watershed steward. That is why I have a camera. I do nature videos. I have about 400 videos on YouTube.
Now, on his business card it says forest gnome, so this is a nature video of a forest gnome.
So when the river was restored, when it was uncovered, you know, I've been around long enough that the river was covered up.
Right.
When they put the new train station in. Is that river actually have nature? I mean, is it aquatic? I mean, it's not just a concrete line thing or something like that?
It is not great, and walls on a river always restrict the amount of life because you can't really, you know, have salt marsh. I mean, all of this was salt marsh. I mean, that was one of the things about this area, was that it was among the richest environments around in terms of what you could eat, you know, from the shellfish to the ducks, you know, and it's a great location. I heard Barnaby Evans talking about it the other day, how, you know, you've got this flat with the salt marsh, and then you've got hills all around it. So, you know, that's one of the things that makes us safe for climate change a little bit is, you know, we'll lose downtown, but all the hills will be fine. You know, you get, you know, at least for another 200 years until it starts going up College Hill and going up Waybosset Hill. You know, so it will eventually. I mean, but, you know, 12,000 years ago, they were under 2 miles of ice. So that's fine.
So tell us about, so you have a varied background.
Varied background in anthropology, evolutionary biology, and 20 years of living in the woods.
So connect that, before we go deeper into the subject today, to these great people. So what's your orientation to economic development?
I spend a lot of time looking at economic development. I've been studying it essentially since the mid-'80s when I ran for state rep. And so, you know, you have to find a way to create prosperity for communities. And I started doing things like serving as a volunteer on the Maine Economic Growth Council. And what I tried to do was tell them to change their name to Prosperity. Because 30 years ago, especially 20 years ago, I started looking at You know, what is the role of growth in an economy on a planet with collapsing ecosystems? So that's kind of where I come from, is looking at economic development as we see it in our community and critiquing it, you know, from a perspective of ecology, from a perspective of justice. I will read you what I have on my card, and that will kind of set the stage for some of my thinking. You cannot heal ecosystems without ending poverty. You cannot end poverty without healing ecosystems. And those are part and parcel, and you have to have justice. And the tagline is, that I don't have on the card, is, and if you don't shut down the military-industrial complex, you're not going to really be able to do any of it.